And what are we listening to right now?
We're listening to a spot-breasted oriole, your life bird, you lucky sucker, you.
Yes, indeed. 604. This is a great trip.
This episode is brought to you by Rad Dudes Who Love Nature.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. I'm here with, this is Billy Brown, and I'm here with
Tony Crosdale.
And we've also got today
Allie Hurwitz
and Scott McWilliams.
Those are our guests. And we're going to start off with an actual comment that we got. Tony?
Yeah, this is a legitimate actual comment. So we got a comment that says, timber rattlesnakes just saved my brain on a super boring workday. Much love, Urban Wildlife Dude. And that is from Kate Atkins from Cutbank, Montana.
Cool.
You don't get much more urban than Cutbank, Montana.
No, you don't.
Or timber rattlesnakes.
Can you tell us where you work?
Actually, both I and my co-guest host, or whatever we are both ER doctors in Philadelphia. I work at Methodist Hospital in South Philly.
And I work at Pennsylvania Hospital in Old City.
And so both of these people are herping buddies of mine. And Scott, who throws more nature books at me than anyone else.
The much more botanically interesting Pennsylvania Hospital.
And then
we're very working class Chenopodium type neighborhood down in South Philly.
Yeah, and Allie is the botanist in our crew. We're going to listen on this show to two pieces. One is a tour of plants growing out of sidewalks and streets around Philadelphia. The other one is a Tony expedition to Miami, where he picks up some lifers and gets deep with the guys from the ABA.
Right, but they weren't in Miami. That was pre-gaming.
He was pre-gaming in where was that? Maryland or Delaware?
Delaware, at Delaware City, Delaware, at the American Birding Association headquarters.
There you go. Before we get into that, I want to ask everybody again, hey, if you're liking us, please spread the like and go to Stitcher and iTunes and tell everybody how much you like us so other people can find us.
And make comments, and because we have been getting a fair amount of likes, and we've been getting plenty of views and downloads. Obviously, we always like more, but we got very few comments, and we'd like more. So feedback is great.
You can leave them there. You can leave them on our Facebook page. You can follow us at Herb Wildlife Cast is our Twitter handle. And you can always email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Can you just really fast say your name and your title?
Lena Struve, Director for Chrysler Herbarium at Rutgers University. When we start walking now, pay attention to the green stuff. The ones that are in cracks, like this, so these are crack weeds, or crack species, and the ones that are in the curb. And the curb is, of course, where you have some difference in elevation, like this, like along it. The ones that are in the curb are much more protected than the ones that are in the cracks. In a sidewalk crack, you get trampled on. If you're a crack in the asphalt parking lot or in the street, you get run over all the time. And then you're going to see plants in both of those habitats, but they're going to be different species. So we find about 100 species in the curb, and we have found about maybe 12 species that can survive in the cracks, which is much, much harsher because they get just stepped on, This is Chenopodium blightum. And Chenopodium blightum usually can be like this big, and here it is this tiny. And it's an amaranth. If you look at the leaf, it looks like somebody bit out the tip of the leaf. But these leaves are usually this big. So everything is smaller, everything is more miniaturized when you're in this area. When you're going to find things. We don't know yet if that's because of the environment making them smaller, or if it's because that if you're smaller genetically, you survive better here. We're working on that right now at Rutgers, doing common garden experiments, collecting seeds from many different things, growing them in one environment, and see what's genetic and what's environmental. This is Sagina procumbens, I bet. That's what I would guess, without looking closely at it. So this is related to carnations. Same family as carnations. Opposite leaves, tiny little thing. This is a plant you often find near seashores, and in cities are often influenced by high salt and hot and sandy. Like same kind of thing that you find at the sandy seashore and rocky seashore with the salt. We actually found several new species from New Jersey in the parking lots, including 2 sedges that are seashore sedges that show up in the parking lots because of the salt. There you go. This is clammy goosefoot. It has the best name ever. So clammy means that it's sticky, and goosefoot because the leaves look a little bit like goose feet, right? So clammy goosefoot.
This is Billy's note that we can't walk 3 feet. I think it's been half an hour. We've gone like 3 blocks.
You have a heritage right here of weedy plants that have come from Europe mostly, and nowadays from other places as well. So this adventitious botany, or rural botany, where you go out and look for crazy things that show up in harbors and old city areas, is a whole field in Europe. They're botanists that that's what they do, finding the first record of that species in that city, or that, and they just try to get all the rare species. They don't care if they're invasive, they don't care if they're from wherever. It's like, oh my God, here's this potentilla from Soviet Union, I got it, and they would go and find these things just in the one only place where it grew, on that heap in that harbor, or that outpost on the pier or whatever. So we should do more of that. We should do more local botany right here under our feet, right? To learn more about the thing. Not that rare and endangered species are not good or interesting or fascinating, but this you can do at your lunch break. Here you have a flowering broadleaf plantain. So you can see flowers at a tiny, tiny size right there. This is knotweed, Polygonum aviculare right here. We have yellow wood sorrel for the first time. Tiny little clover-like leaves.
On the Plantago there.
Yeah.
So in some places, it's like this big.
Yeah.
Do you think it's evolution, or is it?
We don't know yet. We're collecting seeds. Collect seeds from. You can do this at home. People do this. You collect seeds from 5 very different looking Plantagos, same species. You put them in 5 pots in your windowsill, the seeds. You see if they grow. They grow in the same environment in your windowsill at home in your kitchen. Do they look different, or do they look the same? Then you know something about if they are.
What I find appealing about that is people think of the city as the end of nature.
No.
And yet it's a selective force driving evolution that is greater than outside the city.
Yes, so the evolution that happens in cities is faster than happens on Galapagos Island. But seriously, this is like a filter. If you think of the city as a filter, that you have all the variation, natural variation, and only the fittest ones, only the ones that can survive in the city, in this really extreme environment, they're the ones that survive, and then they are becoming like a subset, or a specialized type that lives in cities. And that probably happens in every city all over, so that you find that type both in Philadelphia and Boston, and it has happened independently.
Do you ever people look at cities at diversity related to how long that portion of the city has been inhabited, let's say? Because here you're talking about cracks in Belgium. I'm like, it's nice here. It's more interesting right close to the waterfront, which was the first area settled.
Yes.
Okay.
So go to the waterfront and compare.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Take a hula hoop and go. Yeah, that's what we use, hula hoops for this circle. Compare number of species here, number of species, there.
Yeah.
You can do all kinds of interesting small scale studies.
Ow! Citizen science!
All right. Well, one thing that I thought of listening to that, to your desk, it sounds like she's actively doing some work on this idea that plants become more diminutive.
It's the nature versus nurture question.
And I like it in terms of like island biogeography, the whole idea that ant species that are isolated on an island tend to become diminutive. So you get like pygmy rhinos and that kind of thing.
But that's about it could relate. It's about resource availability.
I don't know. I'm interested in whether the diminutive plant thing applies to the entire plant or just the leaves, like with bonsai. I mean, if you go along the gardens and look at their bonsai when they're blooming or when they're fruiting, and you'll see like their bonsai pomegranate has diminutive leaves but normal sized fruit and flowers.
No, is that just from excessive pruning? In other words, like if something's constantly nipping off the leaves on an
No. It's not even that the leaves are necessarily being constantly nipped off. It's just basically related to the root restriction over time.
Okay.
Well,
Which is
being that
true.
plants, they use an outside entity for their reproduction, right? They use wind, or a bird, or an insect, or water. So you would think that the flower is still going to need...
To be the same size.
Right.
To-
So we need to find that out.
That would be interesting to just look at around the city. I will now be doing
It's not like
this
the
in all
bees are
sidewalks.
smaller, or the wind is different,
Right.
or...
So you think
Right.
in order to be reproductively successful, you still have to preserve your fruit and your flower size.
Yeah. And this is the perfect time for someone to send us a comment if they could let us know if people...
Midget chicory flowers, anyone?
Tell us about your plantains. I'm gonna make a slight detour because I noticed that when we walk around, looking at plants growing out of cracks in Philadelphia, it's like they're around like old like tree plantings or vacant lots. They're always either like some kind of aster family plant. We're all rolling our eyes because we're sick of them already, or amaranths. And so I would like to celebrate my favorite amaranth. What?
I was going to say, to be fair to the asters, it's not that I'm sick of them, it's that they make me feel totally inadequate. I just am overwhelmed.
I'm
by
always
the number of
sending
asters.
Allie pictures and being like, "What is this?" She's like, "It's some kind of."
Aster, and then
Yeah.
I feel like I've disappointed you every time.
Well, it's because asters or orchids, the two families, they're the two most common, the most
The most
diverse,
populous.
plant families in the world. So, and we don't have many orchids in this part of the world.
In West Philly, no,
Right.
not so many.
But there's plenty of asters.
And there's
So
also,
many asters.
but I
Orchid
can,
grows in Brooklyn.
I can ID more of the amaranths, and in particular, I'm a fan of lamb's quarters, as are synanthropic organism
Synanthropic organism
of the episode. In that there are two species. There's one that's European, probably more than two species, but the ones that pop up in cities, one that's American, one that's European, both have sort of similar histories in that they were both cultivated. Both are cultivated. At least the European album, Chenopodium album, is cultivated still. But it's hard to tell like where it comes from, where it's cultivated and where its feral and wild versions begin and end. It's something that like you see growing up everywhere around cities. It's a plant that's like been growing in cities in Europe since we basically had cities, and you can eat it.
Synanthropic organism.
I'm gonna follow Tony to Delaware City and then beyond to Miami, FLA, to explore actually a parallel topic to the plant topic, looking at exotics, look what grows in cities, and then sort of like linking into the weird birder obsession with life lists. All right, Tone, get the plane.
All right, so I'm here at the grounds of Baptist Hospital in Miami. And so who are you, what do you do, and what are we looking for?
I'm Wes Biggs. What I do is show people birds, and right now we're looking for Egyptian goose, which ain't here. but they were a few weeks ago. You can hear mitered and red-masked conures, parrots in the background.
So for my ABA list, I can't count either of those two birds, although I've actually seen at least mitered parakeet in the wild, because they're not countable because no one's figured out whether their population is sustainable, or no one's done the official study to determine that yet. It's kind of arbitrary. But where can you, so this Egyptian goose we're looking for that is countable, where in the United States of America can you find it? And what kind of habitats?
Well, it's found in urban habitats, like right where we are in the pond in front of Baptist Hospital in Miami on Kendall Drive. A month or so ago, I was here 4 or 5 weeks ago and had a couple of birds. Seen them on the campus at Florida Atlantic University in Boca. I've seen them down at the water treatment plant on Virginia Key, which is where we're going next to look for this thing. They're around somewhere. It just seems like this particular time of the year, they're nesting and they're harder to find.
The next bird I get will be ABA bird 600, which will most likely be one of these introduced species rather than a native. I don't need that many native Florida birds left. I have about 4 regular breeders that I need to see. The rest are, Caribbean vagrants or these introduced species. So what are their other targets, and which ones are native versus which ones are introduced?
Well, the big-time native we're going to look for a little bit later on is mangrove cuckoo. Secretive bird, Numbers declined in recent years, probably due to West Nile. At least that's what seems to be the case.
And we're looking for that in a park, right? Not like the Everglades, like in a super wild area either.
Yeah, it's a park with mangrove fringe. It's Black Point Park and Marina. There's a lot of mangrove habitat there, and I've seen a bird there in the past, so I know there's, at least in the past I've been there. I haven't seen one in the last year, but that's the native we're going to be looking for, and other exotics are just north of here, and in the Kendallwood neighborhood, we're going to be looking for bulbuls, red-whiskered bulbul.
And that's a bird from Asia. I've seen them all over Thailand and Malaysia.
Yeah, and we've been looking for spot-breasted oriole. We've already been to the University of Miami campus and A.D. Barnes Park and haven't had any spot-breasted orioles singing on territory like one would hope they would be by now. And I have had them right here at Baptist Hospital and also in the Kendallwood neighborhood.
So I just got my 600th ABA bird, a red-whiskered bulbul. A pair of red-whiskered bulbuls in Kendall, Florida, which is a suburb of Miami. But out here, the difference between a suburb and the city doesn't look hardly any different to me. So that was pretty cool. This is a very appropriate bird for me because for my 600th bird, because I had traveled to Asia quite a bit and seen that bird in the wild in Asia. So it's kind of cool to see it here, a naturalized population in an urban environment. And also, I remember as a kid, I would look at the Peterson Guide and see the red-whiskered bulbul in it and be fascinated by it. And it was cool to see it in Asia, and now it's cool to see it here. So I've come full circle.
And this is a bird we know when it started. Hurricane Donna, 1960, destroyed an aviary where they were breeding red-whiskered bulbuls. In the next spring, the spring of 1961, we had red-whiskered bulbuls breeding all over South Miami and Kendall.
Okay, Wes. So what's our quarry right now?
Spot-breasted oriole.
And we're looking for it in a residential neighborhood?
Residential neighborhood, North Miami.
So do you know the story behind this bird?
No, just that the locals have been reporting it in a pair of them there in that neighborhood for the last several years. And a friend of mine had them there last year and had them there about a week ago. The most likely scenario is that they're escaped cage birds. There's a rumor that a pet store had a cage full of them, and some local, and this is like in the 1940s, or late 40s, early 50s, and some locals just happened to go in the pet store and saw how crowded the birds were in the cage and complained, and came back a week or so later, and the condition hadn't changed, so they threatened to go get the law, and when they came back, the birds were gone. And the story is the guy just went to the back of the store, opened up the cage, and let them all go. We don't know absolutely positively for sure, but it's considered an exotic as opposed to a range extender.
And so we're looking for short-tailed hawk, and I read in that Florida guide that they really like Eurasian collared doves and may actually be breeding more in urban areas to access that prey. Have you found that yourself?
Definitely. We're finding them breeding in city parks and county parks in suburban areas where they never bred before, and finding them more commonly hunting even in urban areas. So the population definitely is going up. It's one of those few cases that we know of where an exotic has led to an increase in numbers of a endangered native. So exotics aren't all bad all the time, usually, but not always. This is also the situation is improving with Cooper's hawks. That's something we never used to get in urban areas. Now we're getting them in urban areas all the time, and the thought is almost, I don't think there's any other possibility, but the advent of Eurasian collared doves has increased the numbers of Cooper's hawks in breeding in Florida.
Interesting. Well, in Philly, we get Cooper's hawks everywhere. Maybe there's this general increase too, but who knows? But the Eurasian collared dove is a fairly interesting story. That's a bird that's spread all over the continent, starting in Florida, right?
In Homestead, Florida, the first nest is found at James Archer Smith Hospital in Homestead back in 1984, I believe, 84, 85.
How did it arrive in America? What's the thought?
The research that's been done indicates that they probably got here on their own from the Bahamas, where they were introduced as a cage bird.
And that bird in Europe colonized Europe from Turkey naturally, though.
Exactly. It's done the same thing now in the New World that it did in in Europe. They came out of Asia Minor in the 30s, and within 30, 35 years, swept across the entire European continent all the way to Iceland. Well, they died out in Iceland because it's just a little bit too cold for them, but it's a common backyard bird throughout the British Isles.
And they're found in urban areas in Europe.
To tell you the truth, I don't know for sure. Well, I can tell you this much. In the States, particularly in Florida, they're in urban areas and suburban areas, and they're in
Agricultural, right?
They're in agricultural areas, and they go to. They're always someplace in fairly close proximity to human habitation. I've never seen them in a totally wild area. They'll be in areas where they had to fly across 30 or 40 miles of wild area to get to a barn and an isolated farm somewhere. But there they are. They're still close to people, but they went through a wilderness area to get there. So I'm not sure if it's quite like that in Europe or not. To tell you the truth, maybe that the birds we've got, although they look exactly like any other European or Eurasian collared dove, maybe the ones that came here probably from the Bahamas, maybe were a lineage that had been cage birds and raised in captivity for generation after generation after generation, and just are more attuned to being close proximity to humans than the ones that came out of Asia Minor. But the interesting thing is, no other species in the world has done what this bird has done, and they did it twice.
Yeah.
Colonized all of Europe in 30 years and colonized all of North America in 30 years. It's pretty staggering.
I guess they're not really invasive because they're staying in these urban suburban areas, agricultural areas, and they don't seem to be competing with native species, and they're providing a food source for raptors, native raptors.
Exactly. They're slower flying and fatter than a mourning dove, so they're easier for a raptor to catch. So you're thinking maybe a young raptor, or maybe a raptor that's just not the best bird catcher, maybe is now going to survive because it has collared doves instead of faster, smarter, sleeker mourning doves. But there was a thought that collared doves were going to push out mourning doves, and in some areas it seems like there are fewer mourning doves now because there are more collared doves. But then in many other areas you don't see any reduction in mourning doves at all.
Okay, I'm here with Jeff Gordon, president of the American Birding Association, and George Armistead, who is the events coordinator for the American Birding Association, and they're all my good buddies, but also Matt Haley, who is a local ornithologist, a PhD student at the Drexel University at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. You are the birding organization, like specifically for recreational birding, the organization for recreational birders. People take their list seriously. People are very interested in getting birds on their list various ways, and one of the ways you have added more birds to the list are these introduced species from other parts of the world that have established viable populations. And what I find really interesting is the majority of those species are in urban areas. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, once you get past that kind of unholy trio of, rock pigeon, European starling, and house sparrow, which, are introductions of exotic species from quite a long time ago that have spread, and really, I guess, came over here in many cases before America was heavily urbanized, and have spread into all kinds of rural habitats and even wilder habitats in some cases. It does seem like if you look at the recent additions to the checklist, there are things in urban areas.
And have you, both of you personally, gone and gotten those birds for your list?
I've gone, I've seen some of the Miami specialties, like for our ABA rally in San Diego 2 years ago. We tallied the, what do they call it now? The orange bishop, or no, there was
nutmeg
mannequin, right?
Which probably is going to be scaly-breasted munia, but
right.
Yeah, nutmeg mannequin.
Yeah, so the nutmeg mannequin or scaly-breasted bunia, which is the same bird actually.
Yeah.
So
the little cage bird. I've seen some of those Florida birds. I used to lead bird tours to South Florida, so we did, go and see red-whiskered bulbuls and spot-breasted orioles and stuff quite regularly. I did fairly recently go and see the Nanday parakeets, and I actually made a search to go see, the dwindling budgerigars on the west coast of Florida, but I have not made any attempt to go after purple swamp hen or Egyptian goose.
I got one fun one when coming back. It might have been from San Diego. I got stuck in Phoenix, and I went out for dinner. And at night, a flock of the lovebirds went by.
Yeah.
Was it rosy-faced lovebirds, right?
Yeah, I think it's on the list as rosy face. But when I was
peach faced in the pet trade, rosy faced on the checklist.
Yeah. About how many regularly occurring birds would you say are in North America? It's like 700 some?
Let's see, how does that work?
It's hard because there's also, people who aren't birders might not know this, but we get visited regularly by seabirds that breed as far away as like New Zealand and, the Falkland Islands, and they spend their summer, their winter in our, off our coast, and those are regular birds. But we also get those count on the list, and we have our breeding birds. And so, how many species are just vagrants you think on the list?
Fewer than 700 breeding birds, and then another several dozen that occur annually but do not breed here. So it's probably somewhere in the low 700s that are annual, would be my guess.
And then, so a lot of those birds, hundreds of those birds are birds that may have been seen only once or twice or three times. About how many of the birds on the list are introduced, would you say?
Maybe less than 2 dozen.
Yeah, I would think it's in that ballpark. There's 669 Code 1 and Code 2 birds, so that means, I believe, basically breeding birds, just like George was saying. Like anything, there's a very steep curve that sets in where, the first 100 are easy, the second 200 are almost as easy. Going 5, as you well know, going from 595 to 600 is a heck of a lot harder than going from 495 to 500.
But it occurred to me, I'm like, well, if I want to make a push, if I'm actually going to get serious and try to get to 700, I need to get all these introduced birds. And that's what bringing, one of the reasons I'm going to Florida. I'm really excited about it. And I'm also excited about it in the context of this podcast because, while I am an urban birder, George lives in Philly with me, not in my house. But we do Bird Philly together. And we do a lot of, we really like birding the city. And so I like that the ABA counts these introduced species because it's in a way validating of the urban environment, the novel ecosystem, which is, it is part of our world now that we have these places that are going to be changed indefinitely, and they have, invasive species that are got to naturalized. I guess a lot of these species aren't even invasive; they're naturalized because they're not leaving the cities.
No, as far as anyone knows, red-whiskered bulbils aren't hurting anything.
Yeah,
in the U.S. at least. Yeah.
Collared doves may only be providing food for Cooper's hawks, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, and I think that's it's really interesting. So much of birding or any kind of pursuit, it really is like philosophical, and it's what people choose to recognize as I like this, I don't like this kind of thing. And I think there's a real evolution within birding that mirrors kind of evolution in the wider community. I think there used to be almost an obsession with the idea of we want all our birds to be 100% natural, to have no taint of human anything, agency. Even people used to get into, you talk about the crazy things that sports fans or other fanatics argue about, might that bird have ridden for part of its trip across the ocean on a ship? And does that invalidate it as a sighting? And I really feel like we're moving in a direction of saying, you know what? Like it, hate it, or anywhere in between, we are in the Anthropocene, and humans are really the architects of a tremendous amount of what goes on in the environment. And I think to a lot of us, kind of ignoring what's going on in these novel and urban habitats just feels like the ostrich approach to things. Right. And, I think in a lot of the conversation we've already had, there's an implicit joke of an Egyptian goose in a drainage ditch in South Florida does not equal, bristle-thighed curlew on the tundra of Alaska or something as a, soul-stirring experience. But as you guys, demonstrate all the time, and we're sitting here at ABA headquarters, and we're all like, we're all just totally stoked that we just saw our first laughing gull of the spring out the window of our yard. Having that focus on a smaller area sometimes makes everything mean more.
When we talk about context, if you are excited about your own city, then seeing birds in that city is a lot more exciting. Like George and I are all about birding, Philadelphia, and we're very close to Cape May, which is arguably the single greatest spot to watch birds in all of America. But yet, we could see all these birds in one day there, or if we see just one of those in a season in Philly, we're so much more excited to see, one of these, a warbler that, if we saw cerulean warbler in city limits, we're so excited about it. Or we see
a golden-winged warbler in Philly.
Yeah.
It's not a golden-winged warbler in Cape May. They're both golden-winged warblers, but it's a different experience.
And I think people should find other ways to get excited about. You can manufacture that excitement if you just think differently, and that's what what's cool about listing is that you can be like, this is my park, and I'm excited about what I can see in my park. This is my yard. This is my city. I only care about two lists: my Philly list and my ABA list. And
it's interesting. Two things. I totally care about my list, but I don't care. What I care about is the experiences that list represents. You heard, even despite having devoted a lot of time and energy and resources to getting that 740 something total, I can't tell you exactly what it is. It's just, it's just a way of maybe, in some very rough sense, measuring this whole body of emotional experience. And that is really the key. So I care about the birds I've seen a lot more than I care about the list per se. And I think that's true for the vast majority of birders.
Yeah, I think of it often as my ABA list is like my diary. And when I started listing, I remember my 300th bird. I don't remember my 200th bird. My 300th bird was American avocet. And it was at that point I thought, I'm going to start keeping track. And I'd see an American avocet, and I had a notebook, and I'd write, 300 American avocet, and then I'd have notes about where I saw it, who I saw it with. And I did that all the way up through mid-600s, and then I kind of lost track of it. But, and I think for a lot of birders, it is sort of like a diary. It's a measure of the experience you've had. It's not necessarily, the list is not the end game, it's the journey.
Mm-hmm. But, Tony, you raised a really interesting point about saying, I really care about my Philly list and my ABA list. I think that's so true. Like, for a lot of folks, maybe it's not their city list, maybe it's their yard list. But, for urban dwellers, I think a city list makes a huge amount of sense. Or, a lot of birders use counties, whatever. But, like, that very local list, the two ends of the continuum was almost where the circle connects. That on the one hand, people typically start out at home and seeing the birds right around them. As they go on, they for many of us, there's this thing of like you branch out and sort of want to, explore the horizon and everything like that. And a lot of us find as time goes by, we're more and more intrigued by the challenges, many of them entirely self-imposed, of seeing what we can figure out locally.
One thing I want to talk about before we go is, two things. Is South Texas, because we're talking about Florida and most of the specialty birds that come into Florida that we're talking about are introduced, and they live in these novel ecosystems in urban areas like parakeets and birds from Asia. But South Texas and Florida does get natural vagrants from the Caribbean, but South Texas gets a lot of vagrants from Mexico. But what's interesting is we're getting to see birds from South Texas that are coming into people's yards.
Right.
And because people have planted out their yards or the trailer park, whatever, with vegetation and with a water regime that's not natural. So can you talk a little bit about birds that are regularly occurring in South Texas, but not to like the wildlife refuges, but are showing up in people's yards, like the crimson collar grosbeak and things like that? Have you noticed a trend like that?
Well, in the specific area you're talking about the lower Rio Grande Valley of South Texas, one thing to remember is that these really lushly landscaped yards that are planted predominantly or totally in native plants. I'm thinking of like Alan Williams' yard in Farr. It's attracted a bunch of vagrants and stuff. In this odd case, they are actually mimicking the more natural South Texas habitat than even a place like Santa Ana or Benson right now, because the river, which that whole ecosystem, and people say Rio Grande Valley, it's actually a delta, and that river used to be able to flood and jump its banks and water the vegetation and fertilize the soil really frequently. Well, now so much water is pulled out of that river for irrigation, and of course, the Border Patrol and everything is not going to be enthusiastic about, us suddenly ceding a bunch of acres to Mexico or, because the river jumped its banks. The river's really controlled. And in a very ironic way, some of these yards and stuff are mimicking the more native conditions. It has been remarkable with both the birds and butterflies, like how an area that was 95+% deforested for agriculture and suburbs, you can still bring these amazing wild birds and wild animals. Just build it and they'll come.
Excellent. And are there any, and if you don't have any, we'll just edit it out, but are there any urban initiatives for the ABA that you could speak to that were specifically urban initiatives that you're working on?
Well, I would say that the first thing is just, awareness. And I think that those of us here on the staff are really thinking of our audience as including urban dwellers. And, don't get me wrong, there's always been plenty of Manhattanites and Los Angelinos in the birding community. But I think the thing that is a shift is realizing you don't have to be in Glacier National Park to have a legitimate, exciting birding experience. You don't have to be there to make a discovery that's really valid or scientifically interesting. So that's number one. The second thing I would say is just in moving the headquarters from Colorado out here to the Mid-Atlantic. Now, Colorado, had certainly Denver, classic urban area, diverse urban population, but out here we have a huge opportunity to interact with a larger urban population and kind of get beyond that sort of traditional birder, stereotype of older, whiter, etc. And we're actually starting to see with our young birder programs really increased participation. And I don't have any specific initiative that I can unveil for you here, but I can tell you that this is something that we are really, really interested in, is how can we make, even people who live in the proverbial concrete jungle, feel like birding is as available to them as somebody who lives, in the Smoky Mountains somewhere.
So this year's bird of the year is green heron.
Right.
Last year was nighthawk, or was it the year before?
Let's see. Kestrel, grosbeak, nighthawk, green heron.
So of those four...
sorry. No. I knew we were skipping one. Rufous hummingbird was 2014.
Rufous hummingbird. So, there you go. So Rufous hummingbird, kestrel, nighthawk, green heron are all four birds that are extremely common in the urban environment. Was that at all intentional? And grosbeaks too come into feeders in people's, I saw them in suburban Albuquerque, just this winter.
What we've really tried to do with the Bird of the Year program from the beginning is, because a lot of times traditionally the ABA might be associated with things like, black-capped gnatcatcher or, Baird sparrow, these very, very restricted range kind of arcane species that if you're going to see a huge ABA list, you've got to go see. And they're wonderful. They're awesome to see. What we wanted to try to do with the Bird of the Year was to pick species that we feel like are charismatic enough, beautiful enough, fascinating enough, that they can actually mint new birders, that they can be the spark bird for a new birder. And yet, they're also species that like just don't lose their appeal. You know, there are maybe some birds that, I don't know, maybe we'll have ring-billed gull for bird of the year someday, but I don't really see it. We're trying to pick species that, like, whether you're seeing it for the first time or the 5,000th, it can really be pretty darn cool. Thanks for the opportunity to chew through some of this stuff with you.
My pleasure. And I want to let you know, even though this is the Urban Wildlife Podcast and it's something I'm involved in, this is actually the first bird-related interview we've done, and we've done
and maybe the last.
And what are we listening to right now?
We're listening to his spot-breasted oriole, your life bird, you lucky sucker, you.
Yes, indeed. 6:04. This is a great trip.
Let's go get 5 and 6.
So I'll pull this back in just with something we can all identify, and Tony and I are going to pull this out for later use in the show, which is...
Unholy Trio!
Yes. Which I've been trying to find it in my heart to appreciate somehow. And the knowledge that the rock dove, a.k.a. pigeons, are feeding peregrine falcons gives them some redeeming value, even if you don't find them valuable in and of themselves. But I was,
I watched a hawk take a pigeon down in the middle of the quad at Penn when I was a freshman, and it was fantastic. It was a bunch of rich kids from Long Island gathered in a circle. At first they were like, "Wow, it's a hawk," and then it just tore this pigeon limb from limb, and there was just a bunch of shocked 18-year-olds.
There was an interesting discussion about dwindling budgies. So were these budgies that are dwindling that he mentioned, are they a listed, established exotic?
They were, and I think they might have removed them from the list because they're so...
But that's an interesting question of what counts as established, because if something has dwindled, evidently it wasn't really established. And it makes me think of, in Philly, we had for many years a well-known population of Italian wall lizards that lived in West Philly, actually, in the zoo. But then there's been another reintroduction of those starting, I think, from Garden City, Long Island, that spread out, and now they're all the way to South Jersey and all over New York. See if that sticks.
Yeah, and then that makes you wonder what caused the population to boom and bust. Whether was there some resource they were exploiting that was finite and they ran out, or did they come up against a weather pattern they couldn't deal with? So is it a global warming phenomenon?
Or is it just
now they're going to survive because it's 2 degrees warmer?
Or is any isolated introduced population is an island population that one of my favorite terms, stochastic event. Perturbation, another good word. Could wipe them out. They can't get repopulated.
Perturbations on tour was a stochastic event. they just played Maryland Death Fest. It was awesome.
I hear that a Creeping Growth Forum is opening for them.
Oh yeah, of course. But I think it's only a matter of time for Creeping Growth Forum is touring and headlining their own shows.
They're ready to bust out. Yeah. One of the themes I liked in there is how we have our things that we're excited to see. Period. So the question is, what do you find in a city that even though you might not be so psyched about it outside the city, when you find it in the city, it blows your mind? For me, I've got 2 species of snake that I love outside of a city, but I have a special quest to find them inside the borders of Philadelphia. Both have been documented. People show me pictures. Drives me nuts. The black rat snakes and common milk snake.
Well, I think it depends on where you are in the city. There are big swaths of Fairmount Park that they don't feel quite so city as cracks in the sidewalk. Cracks in the sidewalk are going to raise more eyebrows for me.
Have you thought about your special crack plant yet?
I've been thinking about my crack plant, and I still haven't picked one. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, telling you, what are birds that, you see?
A golden eagle is number 1 for me.
You saw in Philly?
No. I have not seen Philly.
Oh, yeah. But you think you're going to see it passing over?
Yeah, because, we're on the Eastern Flyway. Flyways, I don't think are as finite as people think they are, but we are on the Eastern Flyway, and people have seen them over Philly before, and the regular Hawk Mountain, the regular Cape May, we're in between the two. People have seen them on Militia Hill as you're out of city and cities south of it. And they've tracked them with satellites, and they've seen they go right over the city. See one flying over the city would be awesome.
Al, you were talking about like the plant people being somewhat like, as you call it, plant blind in the city.
Oh yeah, not just plant blind in the city. I mean, it's not strictly a city phenomenon. Just people in general. This is something botanists talk about. Are incredibly plant blind. I mean, the average American is pretty much good with like tree, shrub, plant, and beyond that. There was something someone was talking about how the birders get involved because they start seeing birds like out of their backyard windows.
Yeah.
They start getting kind of sucked in by that because birds are cute, personable, and hoppy. But you don't really run into a lot of you don't really run into a lot of botany types who got into
because of some charismatic
chenopodium that they were, weeding out of their yard.
I think the clammy goosefoot could be that plant.
I think you're far more likely, at least in my experience with botany people, to get sucked in by the exotic, attractive things you see at botanical gardens or arboreta, and then you get more into the sort of, more mundane things that you find around you. And
plants definitely have a way of becoming background. I mean, I spend a lot of time in nature, and until I really learn, sat down to force myself to learn tree species, they literally, for me, until a couple of years ago, were just trees.
Well, yeah, and I mean, there's giant gaps in my botanical knowledge, things that I've never bothered to weed through.
But once you put a name to them, it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, and once you...
No, I've been having that experience with the plants, where I will look at vacant lots, and I can ID more than I can't.
Yeah,
and
it's different.
And now I'm not just like, oh, what is that? I'm like, it's some kind of amaranth. It's not the four that I know.
Right.
Now I kind of want to email Allie or Dave Hewitt and be like, what is that?
Slotted into families, at least.
Yeah.
You're like, all right.
Have you seen any United States species or what you think of as the local natives in other cities around the world? You're like, oh, that's just and then you're like, wait, but I'm in Hong Kong. It shouldn't be here.
I'm thinking of the Nazi raccoons. Nazis love messing with everything, but there was a Nazi who was
the Nazis messed a lot of stuff.
He was he wanted to improve the fauna of Europe. So he introduced raccoons to Germany, and now they're all over.
Adolf Hitler introduced raccoons.
Someone in his, I forget, Goebbels or one of those jerks.
Do you know how much World War II bullshit I know? And I have never heard that story.
Here's a headline. Army of Nazi raccoons forced Germans to admit defeat. Nazi raccoons on a warpath.
Exotic, invasive.
So you went to Miami. Do you go to any other? Have you been to any other cities looking for exotics specifically?
I have. Miami's the first time I really made an effort. It's also a function of the fact that I'm I'm running out of birds that I got to see.
So the list is driving you to.
Yeah, because man, I've seen so much stuff. I'm there's 7 birds I can get on my list in Florida. I think partly due to this podcast, or not so much this podcast, but my mentality, my interest that led to us doing this podcast together also got me interested in these urban birds. So I think I might have overlooked them before. I I don't want to go after these introduced species, but I'm now that I think it's kind of cool and I have a different viewpoint on them. There's definitely other ones I want to go track down and see. I mean, the Eurasian tree sparrow in St. Louis. It's very similar. It's a congener with the house sparrow, but it's only really restricted to the St. Louis area.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me, since this is probably my only chance to bring this up on your podcast, of a paradox about you that's always fascinated me, Billy, that you hate sprawl.
I hate sprawl.
You hate human habitation in general.
I do hate sprawl. I don't hate
you hate the impact of humans on nature.
Yeah,
so there are these two flip sides to your personality as a naturalist, where, when we're driving to some pristine area to herp, you're cursing people with lawns and...
Because they take up so much space.
But then there's this other part of you that is in love with nature sneaking into an entirely human habitat.
He's just cheering for nature every time.
Well, yeah, but why isn't he cheering for nature in that guy's lawn?
I also sort of, maybe a lot of people have this trait, you root for the underdog. And so, I think that,
totally.
You're going to find cool things in your swimming pool in your backyard in the suburbs, interesting snakes maybe get washed up in there, or your cat dragged in from the backyard. But like, I think it's yet cooler when you find the black rat snake in an urban park next to the projects, rather than just like in a spot that used to be like an overgrown farm field up until 15 years ago.
It's also kind of like cheering for nature to survive us.
Yeah.
You know? Like when you see it coming through the cracks and curbs and sidewalks.
But then, like, what if it's... But then, like, it's surviving... It's not just surviving us, though. It's like, there's something neat about... And I guess I could feel the same way about suburbs if I cared enough. It's like the novel ecosystem idea that it isn't like anything else on the planet. Like that
we're living in the Anthropocene. It's
right.
We're in a new era. Nature's not going to stop just because we have...
And we're in a new era, and we shape us. We're a keystone species, shaping particular landscapes in particular ways. And so it's like I find it fascinating to see what moves in with us.
Well, and this is going to be the story, I think, for naturalists of the next 50 years of our lives, is learning to live with what happens next. Because we have pretty much despoiled everything at this point. We're getting, in the next 50 years, we will finish
despoiling everything.
Everything. And we will have to learn to live with the remnants and what happens next. And we'll learn to love it, or not.
Did you think of your sidewalk crack plant yet, Allie?
No, now I'm totally depressed.
Coming up on the next episode... La-da-da. Okay, next episode, we're gonna...
that's the whole point.
My apologies.
So we're gonna...
He's not Snoop Dogg, I'm not Nate Dogg.
There you go.
We're just dogs.
We're going to talk to Len Albright, who is a sociologist and avid fisherman, striper enthusiast, and we're going to hear...
Not the Christian metal band.
A striper
enthusiast? There's a Christian metal band called Striper?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. No, I don't think he knows anything about them. But we're going to talk about urban fishing, sort of fishing as a gateway to the natural world and connections to like broader ecological topics. And we'll hear all about his new book.
Watch birds every day. I also have this. I mean, I have this other thing about. I really want to. I don't know if it's possible, but I would love to be like a black bear's little spoon, while I want the big spoon for a raccoon.
Explain this some more.
That is the weirdest thing anyone has ever seen.
I would like to. You're like a cuddle pile.
You want a spoon with a black bear and a raccoon.
Imagine the bites you're going to get from their parasites.
Maybe. I would just love to like.
And from them.
I wish that like. Don't you like when like your cat curls up in your lap or like your dog? But imagine if a bear was your friend.
A bear-coon sandwich.
Yeah. As I say, there's a beautiful calico cat. It's just coming up to get love from me. Which is obviously interspecies friends, and that would be awesome if I
feel like we should point out for anyone still listening that you consumed an entire glass of limoncello.
I'm not even remote
earlier in the
Like
podcast.
10 ounces chasing a Miller High Life.